Standing at the crossroads of fear and faith is never easy, especially when financial burdens grow heavier by the day and solutions seem painfully out of reach. Welcome to Timeless Prayer. Yet, throughout history, countless believers have discovered that in moments of deepest uncertainty, heaven often opens its doors through the intercession of saints, especially through the powerful devotion known as the Bread of St. Anthony. What you are about to explore is not legend, not folklore, and not a collection of embellished tales. These are real testimonies from ordinary men and women across the world. People just like you who turned to St. Anthony of Padua in their hour of need and witnessed financial miracles that defied logic, circumstance, and even despair. This introduction prepares your heart to discover the 4 greatest financial miracles associated with this humble act of faith. Each testimony reveals a profound truth. When generosity is offered in honor of St. Anthony, blessings return multiplied. When trust is placed in God's servant, new doors begin to open. When faith is shared, miracles unfold in ways no human effort could orchestrate. The prayer to St. Anthony has long been a source of hope for those experiencing hardship. And today, it may become the turning point you have been searching for. As you begin this spiritual journey, allow yourself to be addressed personally and intimately. Let the stories ahead speak to your fears, your debts, your silent prayers, and your longing for relief. Whether you are seeking clarity, stability, or a breakthrough that feels impossible, know this: countless believers have stood where you stand now, and through St. Anthony's intercession, they found help far greater than they imagined. You are now invited to open your heart, strengthen your faith, and discover how the bread of St. Anthony has multiplied miracles for generations, and how it may do the same for you. The first miracle, the multiplication of the last penny. Marta's story is one of those testimonies that makes you stop, think, and ask yourself, what would I do if I were standing exactly where she stood? Would you still believe when everything around you seems to be collapsing? Would you still trust in the spiritual power of generosity when you have almost nothing left today? Kon hai na hekau chuyan nain hu the no jang george ke truk tiep chokon. Boy vi biet jao. Chin hangon lua juxtin ma. Marta gen thaplen sela jiu ma chua ve St. Anthony of Padua. Muon thaplen trong tri tim kon ge luke ne. Marta was a 52-year-old seamstress, a woman known for her strong spirit, her love for God, and her generosity that had no limits. For more than 30 years, she woke up every day at 5 in the morning, sewed until 10 at night, took care of 2 children alone after her husband abandoned her, and still found time to help neighbors, visit the sick, and volunteer at church. Everyone in her neighborhood said the same thing about her. Marta will never go without. She always finds a way. But does life ever ask permission before it collapses? Have you ever felt like everything was fine one day, and then suddenly, everything you built started falling apart? This is exactly what happened to her. One Tuesday morning, while she was finishing a wedding dress for a client, her phone rang. It was the hospital calling to say that her 83-year-old mother, Donna Conceição, had suffered a massive stroke. In that moment, her world shattered. Her mother was not just her mother, she was her best friend. Her silent support, the grandmother who held her family together. When she entered the ICU for the first time, Marta felt like all the strength she had carried for years evaporated. She prayed in those cold corridors like someone begging heaven not to close its doors. And then came the financial collapse. Her mother stayed in intensive care for 3 months. 3 months of hospital runs, consultations that cost nearly a month's income, therapy sessions she couldn't afford. Medicines insurance didn't cover. How long can a person fight without breaking? As she watched her mother suffering, Marta made the choice any loving daughter would make. She dropped everything to be at her bedside. But that meant losing clients, canceling orders, and eventually losing almost all her income. Her monthly earnings fell from $3,000 to less than $500. To survive, she took out loans, then more loans, maxed out her credit cards, borrowed from dangerous lenders, sold her jewelry, sold her TV, and even sold her secondary sewing machine. But have you ever noticed how fast money disappears when you're desperate 6 months later? She was $12,000 in debt, and then came the knock at the door. The collectors, the calls, the threats, the fear, nights without sleep, days without appetite, moments without faith. Have you ever questioned God in your darkest hour? Have you ever felt ashamed to pray because you thought heaven was tired of listening to you? Marta found herself whispering, "Why is God allowing this? Why do miracles never happen for me? Where is St Anthony of Padua when I need him?" Everything fell apart when she received the eviction notice. 2 months of unpaid rent. She had 48 hours to pay or leave. At 2 a.m, sitting alone in her kitchen, Marta cried the kind of tears that come from the deepest place of the soul, the kind of tears that only those who have truly felt fear and humiliation can understand. And yet, it was in that broken moment that heaven planted a seed. One sleepless Tuesday morning, she began searching online for prayers, hoping to find something, anything, that could give her strength. That's when she discovered devotions to St Anthony of Padua. The saint, known not only for helping people find lost things, but for helping the poor, multiplying bread, and answering prayers in impossible cases. She read his words. True abundance comes from what you share. When you feed another, God feeds you. When you break your bread, God multiplies your table. She closed her laptop and just cried. How could she share what she didn't have? How could she give bread when she was hungry herself? But then, a quiet voice, a whisper of faith, rose inside her. Faith is giving even when you have nothing. Have you ever felt that small, gentle whisper asking you to trust, even when trusting feels impossible? The next morning, she opened her drawer and saw her last $15. With that money, she could buy bread for herself, maybe some coffee. Instead, she felt this powerful spiritual pull, the kind that only people who have truly hit rock bottom understand. She went to the market and bought 2 loaves of bread, 1 liter of milk, and a package of cookies. Then she walked to the town square, found an elderly homeless man named João, and handed them to him. He cried as if someone had brought him back to life, right there in the open air. Marta knelt and whispered a prayer to St. Anthony. I put my trust in you, under your protection. I give even the little that I have, and I wait for a miracle. When she stood up, she felt something change, not outside, but inside. Something had shifted. It was as if she had planted a seed of heaven in the soil of her suffering, and that's when the multiplication began. That very afternoon, an old client called needing an urgent dress and offering $500 up front. A spark of hope. The next morning, her cousin Roberto called from Sao Paulo, saying he had dreamed about her. Marta, I dreamed you were in trouble. Tell me what's happening. After she shared her story, there was silence. Then Roberto said, I'm transferring $10,000 to you right now. It's not a loan, it's a gift. You helped everyone your whole life. Now let someone help you. Have you ever felt like God was using someone's hands to lift you up? By Friday, the Federal Revenue Service called to say she had an old tax refund of $2,500 waiting for her. On Saturday, she received a job offer for 50 dresses for a charity event, with $3,000 up front. And on Sunday, an anonymous envelope appeared at her building containing $1,000 with a note. For the kind seamstress who always helps others, God bless you. In 7 days, Marta received $17,000 more than enough to pay her debts, cover her needs, and restore her life. But the true miracle wasn't the money. The true miracle was seeing how every blessing came through the hands of people touched by God. It was as if St. Anthony of Padua himself had whispered to their hearts. And Marta realized something. The bread of St. Anthony doesn't multiply in your hands. It multiplies in your faith. When you give even when you have nothing, when you trust even in darkness, when you sow kindness in dry soil, God activates spiritual laws that move mountains. And it all began with a prayer, a single act of faith, and the courage to give away her last piece of bread. Miracle 2, the unexpected income. Carlos's story reminds you that even in the darkest moments, when every door seems locked and every path seems blocked, there is still a place where hope breathes, where faith works quietly behind the scenes, and where an act of generosity can awaken a miracle far greater than anything reason can calculate. This second testimony, known as the miracle of unexpected income, teaches you that the divine often enters through the smallest crack, through the moment when a person chooses trust over fear, compassion over self-preservation, and hope over despair. Carlos, a 45-year-old mechanic who had spent 15 years working faithfully in the same repair shop, suddenly saw his world collapse when the business closed during the pandemic. Overnight, he found himself unemployed, responsible for 3 children, crushed by expenses, and living on unemployment benefits that barely covered rent. He picked up odd repair jobs wherever he could, trying to keep his family afloat. Yet, every month, the numbers never added up, and every week seemed heavier than the one before. His heart broke when his youngest daughter needed a costly dental procedure he could not afford, and the pain on her face was more than he could bear. Just when it seemed everything was slipping beyond saving, his wife told him about a neighbor who had received a grace through the charity called the Bread of St. Anthony. Carlos, who had never been a man of devotions, felt hesitant, but suffering humbles the heart and makes space for faith to speak. His wife explained that the practice required a simple yet profound gesture, to give food to someone who had even less, trusting that heaven returns to the giver far more than what was offered. Carlos looked at his nearly empty refrigerator and wondered how it could be possible, how anyone could give when they barely had enough to survive. Yet love for his daughter pushed him to act, with only 100 reais left. He walked to the market, bought 10 loaves of bread, 10 liters of milk, and 10 bananas, and carried them to a street corner where a woman with 2 small children often begged. When he handed her the food and told her it was given with love, tears flooded her eyes. Her children had survived for days on nothing but sugar water. In that moment, Carlos felt something shift inside his heart, a quiet, trembling prayer rising from the deepest part of him as he whispered, "St. Anthony of Padua, if you open doors for me, I will open doors for others. I put my trust in you. I stand under your protection, and I wait for a miracle." 2 days later, on a Thursday that seemed like any other, an unexpected phone call changed everything. A former co-worker had opened a repair shop and needed a partner. Not someone with money, but someone with skill, loyalty, and experience. Carlos was invited to join as a minority partner, investing only his labor and receiving 30% of the profits. What happened next was nothing short of astonishing. In the very first month, The shop was flooded with customers from places they had never advertised. Companies they had never contacted reached out with big contracts. Word-of-mouth referrals multiplied so quickly that the shop barely kept up with demand. In 30 days, Carlos earned more than he used to make in 3 months, and the flow of work only grew. Today, he owns 2 thriving repair shops, employs 12 people, and supports other families with the same generosity that once sparked his own miracle. Every week he donates food baskets, and every time he does, new opportunities seem to find him without explanation. Carlos discovered a spiritual truth that many overlook, that when you feed someone in need, God feeds your livelihood. When you care for those who suffer, heaven cares for the work of your hands. When you give from the heart, you receive from a place far higher than your own effort. This miracle unfolded because he dared to give rather than cling, to believe rather than fear, to call upon prayer to St. Anthony with sincerity, and to trust that the intercession of St. Anthony of Padua can turn scarcity into abundance. His life became living proof that generosity is not loss, but multiplication, that gratitude attracts providence, and that blessings flow to those who create room for them through compassionate action. And now, as you listen to this testimony, you too are invited to place your trust in this same grace, to open your heart with patience and strong hope, and to whisper your own prayer to St. Anthony, believing that the miracle you are waiting for is already on its way. Beloved soul, as you listen to this testimony, open your heart, for the miracle you seek may already be unfolding under the protection of St. Anthony of Padua, the saint whose compassion reaches those who feel cornered by life, debt, fear, and despair, and who never abandons the faithful who whisper a prayer to St. Anthony with sincerity and hope. Let me speak directly to you now, because what you are about to hear is not simply a story but a sign, a reminder that the divine help you long for can come in ways you do not expect. The third miracle, known as the payment of the impossible debt, reveals with overwhelming clarity that no financial burden is too heavy and no crisis too deep when you place your trust in the intercession of St. Anthony of Padua, especially when your heart is open to charity. Fernanda, a 38-year-old nurse, learned this truth in the most painful and transformative way. She had always been careful with her finances, responsible and disciplined. But life struck her when her husband suffered a severe work accident that kept him unemployed for 2 long years. Their income collapsed, and the bills multiplied. Government assistance was delayed for months, and when it finally arrived, it covered barely half of what her husband used to earn. With courage, Fernanda took on every responsibility: rent, utilities, school expenses, food, and medical treatments for her husband. To keep their home standing, she applied for loans, maxed out credit cards, borrowed from dangerous lenders, and even sold personal belongings. When her husband finally recovered and returned to work, they discovered the terrifying total they owed $45,000, an impossible sum for a couple earning merely $5,000 a month. Even sacrificing every comfort, they could not pay more than $1,000 a month, not counting the suffocating interest that increased relentlessly. And as often happens when debt becomes unbearable, fear entered their home. Loan sharks began to threaten them. Fernanda stopped sleeping, her heart constantly gripped by anxiety, and her marriage trembled under the weight of so much pressure. It was then that a co-worker, moved by compassion, told her about the mysterious and powerful devotion of the bread of St. Anthony. Fernanda was Catholic, devoted, but she had never heard of this particular practice that for centuries in Italy, Spain, and Latin America has been associated with unexpected financial miracles. Her co-worker explained that St. Anthony of Padua has a special grace for resolving financial crises that appear impossible to overcome. But this grace often responds when the believer performs an act of charity, a gesture of giving even when one feels there is nothing left to give. Fernanda hesitated. How could she help someone else when she herself had nothing? Yet desperation has a way of opening the heart, and she decided to take a step of faith. On a Friday morning, she took the $50 she had saved for gasoline that weekend and walked to a small bakery near the hospital. With that simple, sacrificial amount, she bought 20 sweet rolls and 2 liters of milk. Then she went to the pediatric ward and lovingly distributed the food to the mothers who had been sleeping for days beside their sick children, many of them unable to afford a proper meal. As she handed out the bread, she whispered a trembling prayer to St. Anthony, saying, "St. Anthony, I place my trust in you. Our debt is impossible, but you are the saint of impossible causes. If you help us, I promise to continue helping these mothers who have even less than I do. I entrust this burden to your hands, and I wait for a miracle." What followed was so extraordinary that Fernanda herself struggled to believe it. On Monday, the hospital's legal department contacted her to inform her that she was part of a labor lawsuit. She did not even know existed an action filed for unpaid overtime. Her share, $15,000. On Tuesday, her husband received a call from the company where he had been injured, offering an out-of-court settlement to avoid a lawsuit for moral damages, another $20,000. On Thursday, she discovered she was entitled to withdraw an old FGTS fund she had forgotten about, $3,000 more. And on Friday, a distant aunt from the countryside phoned her to say she had sold a piece of land and wished to share the money with her nephews, granting Fernanda an additional $8,000. In just 1 week, Fernanda received $46,000, the exact amount needed to erase every debt and still have a little left over. None of this came from her effort, her planning, or her expectations. It came from places completely outside her control, as if invisible hands were working tirelessly on her behalf. Fernanda understood in that moment that she had activated a profound spiritual law. The charity of bread opens the gates of miraculous intervention. When you lift someone who is suffering more than you, even when you yourself are exhausted, you align your heart with the compassion of St. Anthony of Padua, who touches the hearts of those in positions of authority, judges, bankers, employers, officials, so they act with justice, kindness, and mercy. Today, Fernanda keeps her promise faithfully. Every week, she brings bread and coffee to the mothers in the pediatric ward, and she founded a prayer group dedicated to people drowning in impossible debts. The testimonies she receives now are countless, unexpected inheritances, forgiven debts, legal victories no one believed possible, financial blessings that appeared from nowhere, and all of them begin with a single act of faith and a humble prayer to St. Anthony. My dear listener, if your heart is heavy and your financial reality seems unmovable, know this: the same grace that lifted Fernanda is available to you. Put your trust in the Saint of Miracles. Place your worries under his protection, and open your heart to charity, even in the smallest gesture. Do this with sincerity, and you, too, may witness the miracle you have been waiting for. Miracle 4 is known as the miracle of provision for the family, and as you listen to this story, ask yourself, what happens when someone gives even when they have nothing left to give? How far can faith take a person who stands before God with empty hands but a trusting heart? And what if the act of feeding another family becomes the key that opens the doors of heaven over your own home? This is where the testimony of Roberto begins, a humble 50-year-old father who spent more than 15 years running a small produce shop, a simple business that kept food on the table for his wife and 3 children. For many years, he lived an honest life, selling quality fruits and vegetables at fair prices, earning trust, respect, and loyal customers. But when an economic crisis struck his neighborhood, everything collapsed. People lost their jobs, families struggled. Many could not afford even basic groceries. Sales fell so sharply that Roberto tried everything he could think of, lowering prices, changing products, running promotions. Yet nothing worked. Maybe you, too, know what it feels like when you work hard and still see everything slipping away. One day, Roberto looked at his nearly empty shelves and realized he could not pay his suppliers anymore. Even worse, he did not have money to buy food for his own children. Imagine the pain of a father facing his children at dinner and knowing he has nothing left to give. For the first time in 15 years, Roberto understood what it felt like to fail as a provider, and the humiliation pierced him deeply. Maria, his wife, tried to comfort him, but fear was also in her eyes. The children did not yet understand the seriousness of the situation, but the small signs were already there. Why aren't there cookies anymore? Why is dinner so simple? These are the kinds of questions that break a parent's heart. And then, on a quiet Sunday night, as Roberto stood alone in his shop looking at the empty shelves, Maria entered with an idea he first thought was pure madness. She had spoken with a neighbor about the power of the bread of St Anthony of Padua, the tradition of giving food to the poor in honor of the saint, and she wanted them to make an act of faith. Her proposal was shocking. Give away the little food their family still had to a family in an even worse situation. Immediately, Roberto reacted in anger. How could they possibly give away food when their own children were hungry? How could they feed someone else when they could barely feed themselves? But Maria insisted, gently yet firmly. She told him about a Venezuelan refugee family living in a nearby settlement, 2 adults and 4 small children who had gone 3 days without eating. "If we are going to suffer hunger anyway," she said, "then let it be while doing good. If we are going to struggle, let it be while helping someone who struggles even more. Ask yourself, Khan, could you do that? Could you give everything away when your heart is trembling with fear?" When your own cupboards are almost empty, Roberto resisted. But love for his wife and compassion for that suffering family slowly overcame his fear. Together, they gathered everything left in the pantry: 2 kilograms of rice, 1 kilogram of beans, some potatoes, eggs, and a frozen chicken. It was literally their entire food supply for the week. Yet they carried it with trembling hands to the settlement. The gratitude they witnessed was overwhelming. The children hugged Roberto like he was a hero. The mother cried and said words he would never forget. "God will return everything multiplied to you." On their way back home, Roberto prayed a prayer he never imagined he would say, a prayer to St. Anthony. A prayer to St. Anthony of Padua filled with fear and hope all at once. "St. Anthony, I just gave away all the food we had for my family. I don't know if I did the right thing, but I trust that you won't let my children go hungry. If you multiply our provision, I promise I will help other families in need." Have you ever prayed like that, with empty hands but a heart that refuses to give up? On Monday morning, Roberto went to his shop with no idea what to do next. He had no products, no money, and no hope for income. But at 8, a truck stopped in front of the shop. The driver asked for Roberto and introduced himself as a supplier from another city, a man Roberto had never met. He explained that he had a truckload of fresh produce meant for a supermarket, but the order had been canceled. Instead of returning with the goods and losing everything, he wanted to sell them at a symbolic price just to avoid waste. Roberto explained that he had no money at all, but the supplier told him he could pay later, after selling. 3 tons of fruits and vegetables, high quality, fresh, and abundant, were unloaded into his shop. It was the first sign that his prayer to St. Anthony had been heard, but the blessings continued. At Tenahai, a catering company called urgently needing large quantities of fruits and vegetables and was willing to pay up front. Roberto sold half the inventory for 3 times what he owed the supplier. In the afternoon, a local school contacted him, looking for a supplier for their meal program, and Roberto secured a monthly contract that guaranteed income for 6 months. By the end of the day, Roberto had earned more than he usually earned in an entire month. But the miracles did not stop. Over the next few days, new suppliers offered special prices. New customers came, even from distant neighborhoods. Restaurants and cafes wanted contracts. Within just 1 month, Roberto had tripled his revenue. Today, 3 years later, the man who once stood before empty shelves now owns 5 produce shops and is one of the largest distributors in the region. Yet, he never forgot the promise he made. Every single week, he prepares food baskets for families in need, especially immigrants and refugees, because he knows what it feels like to stand on the edge of despair. He even created a social project teaching small business owners how to manage their shops and offering microcredit to those who want to start a business. Roberto discovered a spiritual law that many people talk about but few truly believe. When you feed those who are hungry, God feeds your business. When you provide for those who have nothing, God provides abundantly for you. When you share your bread, even your last piece, God multiplies your table in ways you could never imagine. Think about this. Con, what kind of blessings could enter your life if you dared to act with faith instead of fear? What miracles could St. Anthony of Padua unlock for you if you offered your generosity even in your hardest days? What could God multiply for you if you trusted Him the way Roberto did? Roberto understood that compassion attracts compassion, kindness attracts kindness, and generosity attracts abundance. Families who care for others attract families who care about them. Customers who value goodness are drawn to businesses built on goodness. This entire chain of miracles began with a single act, the charity of the bread, an act offered under the protection of St. Anthony, a moment of trusting prayer to St. Anthony when everything seemed lost. Roberto activated the miracle of provision because he dared to give everything to someone who had even less, believing that St. Anthony would not let his children go hungry. And in the end, God multiplied his table beyond anything he could have dreamed. Dear friend, as you listen to these 4 miracles, let your heart open to the truth they reveal, because each one carries a message meant to guide you, lift you, and draw you closer to the divine abundance waiting to unfold in your life. Each miracle is a reminder that the same grace that worked through the bread of St. Anthony of Padua is still alive, still moving, and still ready to multiply what you place in God's hands. These miracles teach you that true abundance is never about how much you hold, but about how much faith you dare to show when everything in your life feels small, limited, or on the edge of breaking. The first miracle, the multiplication of the last cent, whispers to your soul that no matter how little you have left, there is always someone with even less. And when you take that small portion, that last coin, that final bit you were tempted to cling to, and you offer it to another in need, you activate a spiritual law older than time itself. This divine law unlocks unexpected blessings and makes room for resources you could never foresee. It moves because action proves your faith. When you step forward with a trembling heart but a willing spirit, when you show heaven that you trust in what seems impossible, you shift out of fear, out of scarcity, and into the frequency of gratitude, trust, and holy generosity. and it is in that frequency that miracles rise naturally. Just like the multiplication performed in every prayer to St Anthony offered with sincerity. Then comes the second miracle, unexpected income. This miracle opens your eyes to the creative ways God can make doors appear where walls once stood. When you give food to someone hungry, even while you yourself are unemployed, you connect with blessings far beyond what your own human plans could design. This divine law moves because when you dare to care for another person's need, God begins tending to yours. When you solve someone else's burden, God sends help to solve your burden. When you become the answer to another person's silent prayer, God appoints someone to become the answer to yours. This is the supernatural reciprocity that surrounds every faithful prayer to St Anthony of Padua. The third miracle is the clearing of an impossible debt. It reveals that no financial crisis is too heavy for heaven, no debt too deep, and no situation too tangled when you place your trust in divine intercession. When you help someone facing hardship even while your own hardships feel unbearable, you call upon supernatural forces that work quietly, persistently, and invisibly to untangle what you cannot resolve alone. Compassion attracts compassion. Mercy unlocks mercy. When you ease the suffering of another soul, God leans down to ease yours. He sends help through people who hold authority over your situation: judges, managers, leaders, decision-makers. This is the hidden power behind charity done in faith. Then you reach the fourth miracle, the provision for the family. This miracle shows you that when you decide to feed another family, even if it means leaving your own table nearly empty, you connect with the infinite generosity of God. When you put the needs of others first, God places your needs first. When you care for someone else's children, God surrounds your children. When you become a channel of blessing, you become a vessel ready to receive multiplied blessings. These four miracles share one unbreakable thread. They were born when ordinary people acted with extraordinary trust. This is the law of divine reciprocity, a spiritual truth St. Anthony of Padua taught not with theories but with miracles. Whenever you give to someone who has less than you, especially when you yourself have almost nothing, you make a deposit in the bank of heaven where the interest is supernatural and the return always exceeds what was given. But this law only comes alive when your giving is rooted in genuine compassion. God sees the intention behind every offering, and He responds to pure intention with pure blessing. Gratitude, generosity, and prosperity weave together in ways that science can observe but cannot fully explain. While science knows that grateful and generous people attract more opportunities and healthier relationships, it cannot explain the supernatural transformation that occurs when charity is performed in faith. When you give while invoking the powerful intercession found in every prayer to St. Anthony, suddenly natural laws bow before spiritual laws. You begin operating in a dimension where subtraction becomes increase and division becomes multiplication. This is divine mathematics, a sacred arithmetic in which human logic loses its power. Marta learned that 15 reals given with trust carry more weight in heaven than 15,000 hoarded with fear. Carlos saw that 100 reals invested in charity produced a greater return than 100,000 stored in the bank. Fernanda witnessed 50 reals given with compassion erase debt more effectively than 50,000 kept with greed. Roberto discovered that giving a simple basket of food attracted more customers than expanding his advertising budget. They all learned the same truth. True wealth is found not in what you keep, but in what you give. Not in what you protect, but in what you release. Not in the size of your bank account, but in the size of your heart. Now the question turns to you. Which miracle do you need? Which door must open? Which blessing must multiply? Which situation in your life is crying out for divine intervention? If you need the multiplication of the last cent, take the little you have and place it into the hands of someone with even less. What matters is not the amount, but the faith behind it. Buy bread, fruit, or a simple warm meal for someone in need, and ask St. Anthony to multiply your resources. If you need unexpected income, perform an act of charity even in unemployment, knowing that when you open a door for another soul, heaven opens a door for you. If you need impossible debts paid, help someone carrying financial stress heavier than their strength, because every act of mercy activates divine intercession. And if your deepest need is provision for your family, then feed another family in faith. Trust that God will fill your table with more than enough and surround your home with divine protection. Whatever miracle you seek, act with faith, act with love, and act believing in the power of divine multiplication. You are not meant to wait until you have abundance before giving. Abundance comes because you gave. You are not meant to wait until you feel secure to help someone. Security comes because you trusted. These miracles are not coincidences, but testimonies to prove that your own miracle is possible. Your story can change. Your situation can turn around when you take your first step of faith. When you declare your need with courage and say which miracle you seek, you join a chain of prayer to St. Anthony that strengthens your hope and carries your faith until the blessing arrives. Shared faith multiplies, just like the bread multiplied in his hands. If someone in your life is struggling financially, share this message with them. You never know when God intends to use you as a vessel of hope. And remember, St. Anthony of Padua continues to multiply the bread for those who dare to give before receiving, trust before seeing, and love even when they themselves are tired, hungry, or afraid. Your miracle is already on its way. Hold your faith, take action, and prepare yourself to witness how God will move through the intercession of St. Anthony, because the multiplication you seek is already being woven for you in the unseen. Now, with my heart opened by these miracles of generosity and faith, I come before God under the protection of St. Anthony and offer this sincere prayer. St. Anthony of Padua, beloved friend of the poor, protector of those who suffer, gentle guide of souls who stand on the edge of despair, I come before you now with a heart full of need, full of hope, and full of trust. I stand here carrying burdens that feel too heavy for my own strength, yet I know that nothing is too heavy for the hands of heaven, nothing too tangled for your intercession, nothing too lost for the grace of God to restore. St. Anthony, you who walked among the hungry, the forgotten, and the weary, you who comforted the brokenhearted and lifted those who feared the future, you who multiplied bread, opened doors that were sealed shut, and reconciled the impossible, hear my prayer today. Just as countless souls throughout history turned to you in their darkest hours, I now ask you to look upon my life with compassion and bring light into the places where I feel overwhelmed, afraid, or uncertain. You know the challenges that weigh on my mind. You see the debts that frighten me, the bills I cannot pay, the responsibilities I carry, and the pressures that exhaust my spirit. You know the moments when I lie awake at night, wondering how everything will work out. And you know how often my heart trembles between fear and faith. But today, St. Anthony, I choose faith, I choose trust, I choose to place everything, my needs, my worries, my family, my finances, into your blessed hands. I ask you, gentle saint, to intercede for me before the throne of God. Speak my name with tenderness. present my difficulties with your great love. Ask the Lord to pour over my life the miracles I cannot produce through effort alone. Ask Him to open the doors I cannot unlock, to create paths where I see none, and to send help from places I never imagined. St. Anthony, you who have multiplied bread for the hungry, multiply also the blessings in my life. Where there is scarcity, bring abundance. Where there is anxiety, bring calm. Where there is loss, bring restoration. Where there is confusion, bring clarity. Teach my heart to trust not in numbers, not in circumstances, not in the limits of what I see, but in the infinite generosity of God who provides for His children with perfect timing. I ask you especially to help me grow in the spirit of charity. Just as those before me experienced miracles after offering bread to someone in need, teach me to loosen my hands, to give even when I feel I have little, to sow kindness with courage, and to trust that what I release from love will return to me multiplied. Touch my heart so deeply that generosity becomes my path, compassion becomes my habit, and faith becomes my daily anchor. St. Anthony, protector of families, look upon my home with blessing. Guard the ones I love. Watch over our table, our work, our health, and our future. If we lack, send provision. If we fear, send peace. If we struggle, send strength. Cover my family with the same grace that protected those who trusted in your intercession throughout the centuries. Bless my efforts, my labor, and my plans. Bless the opportunities that are meant for me, and remove those that would harm me. Lead me toward the work that aligns with God's purpose, and help me recognize the chances to grow, to rise, and to rebuild. May everything I do be touched by divine favor, and may every step I take move me closer to the life God desires for me. St. Anthony, I entrust to you every impossible situation, every unopened door, every financial challenge, every fear about tomorrow. Walk with me as you walked with those who begged for your help. Take my hand when I feel weak. Speak to my heart when I feel lost, and guide me gently through this season of uncertainty toward a future filled with hope, peace, and provision. I ask you to place my prayer before God with confidence in His mercy. May heaven respond not only to my needs, but also to the faith I place in you at this very moment. Let this prayer rise like incense, touching the heart of the Lord, drawing down blessings, and aligning my life with His divine plan. Strengthen my belief that miracles still happen, that help can arrive suddenly, that breakthroughs can appear unexpectedly, and that grace flows most abundantly when I act with love, humility, and trust. Remind me that every act of kindness I offer becomes a seed of blessing planted in the soil of heaven. Help me never doubt that God sees every sacrifice, every tear, every prayer whispered in the quiet of my fear. St. Anthony, carry with you today not only my requests but also my gratitude. Thank you for listening to my heart. Thank you for your constant intercession. Thank you for the miracles you have brought to countless souls and the miracles you are preparing to bring into my life. Even before the blessings arrive, I choose to thank you. Even before the doors open, I choose to praise God. Even before the solutions appear, I choose to trust. May your presence accompany me in moments of doubt. May your protection surround me in moments of weakness. May your example inspire me to serve others with humility and compassion. And may your intercession bring forth blessings so aligned with God's goodness that my life becomes a testimony of faith. St. Anthony of Padua, miracle worker, friend of the afflicted, guardian of the poor, I place my heart, my needs, and my future under your care. Pray for me, guide me, strengthen me, and stay near me as I walk this path with hope renewed, Amen.